You wanted that slide, right? Okay. Oh, sorry, do you want me to finish this first? Do you want me to wrap up and then back? Yeah, okay, got it. Cool. It's okay if you haven't finished completely. So yesterday, we had a nice easy day of I do a bit of talking, a bit of exercising, then breaks, and then come back. It gets harder today because some of your breaks are working breaks. Not really, you're still having a break. But what I want you to do over the break, it's going to be a half-an-hour break, is ask each of your questions to one other person that you might meet as you go along. Now, because you all know you're doing this exercise, you don't have to be worried about seeming a bit strange, walking up to Ali or any of us and going, what colour is your front door? We'll know what you're up to, but that's fine. Blue, yes, yeah, when you're ready. Extra bonus points if you can ask a barrister any of these questions and maintain recording without seeming completely weird. But just a good way to start to test these questions and just notice where people's eye patterns go. If any of the questions you haven't finished, that's completely fine, because there's an infinity of questions for these. So it's not that you needed to get a definite list now. It's just to start getting your brains thinking about what kind of questions will elicit these responses. Final thing is a good way of testing these out is by watching TV. Diane just said to me she remembers when she first learned these, and she put post-it notes around the TV. So 6 post-it notes for visual remembered, auditory remembered, audio digital, visual construct, audio construct, and kinesthetic. Depending on how your brain works, I might confuse you over the next 7 seconds. So if I do, just ignore it. But the way I remember them is visual construct, audio construct, and kinesthetic has a K which sounds like a C. So all the construct Ks are on this side, and the remembered plus audio digital is on that side. So I just find that an easy way to remember construct, kinesthetic. If that doesn't work for you, that's the way my brain works, and you just ignore it to find your own way. Post-it notes on TV are a good idea. Be careful when you're watching TV shows, though. It's better to watch kind of chat shows or political shows where people are genuinely answering as opposed to TV shows with actors, because sometimes they fake their eye movements or they're a little bit weird. So genuine kind of responses are better. And that's eye patterns.
I wasn't going to bring too much on in this weekend, but I'm just going to wrap it in with a bit of help. So, this one, I'm sat at the back of the room. I know a few people feel like, oh, yeah. Here's the thing: everything we're teaching you is that you've got the background knowledge. I have never had to sit with a client and go, you're not consciously incompetent, but I'm consciously competent. Does it mean it's consciously incompetent, or am I consciously competent? Right? You're never going to use it in that context. This is just for you to understand how you learn. When I'm explaining it to children, if I ever have to, I don't do it that way, and that's not sort of that's wrong, I'm right, because I needed to learn it this way to understand it. When in the very beginning, I gave you a brief overview of Volley, and I said conscious, subconscious mind, front part iPhone, yeah, back part library. Let's try this one that way, okay? If the back part's a library, and I'm 6 months old, everything I've learned is in that library. Once I've learned it, that's it, I've got it. It's in my head, and I don't need to think about it anymore. I just do it. And I'm either brilliant at it, if I've done it enough and practiced enough, or I'm fairly good at it. Okay? But it has to be in the library first. So let's take a 6-month-old. He can crawl, but he can't walk yet. He doesn't know what walk means. It's like, I'm 6 months old. I've no idea what you're talking about. Why do I need to stand up? It's much better doing this than you carrying me. But why do we? Bloody hell, it's a con, isn't it? So at 6 months old, he has no idea what he's doing, okay, and he doesn't know what walking is, so he's got no point of reference. Then someone starts to say, "Here, get on this toy stand. Oh, look, he's walking his first steps," and he knocks everything over. At that point, he is aware of what walking is, so he knows what it is now, but he's not very good at it yet, okay, but he knows what it is. As he practices, he gets better at it. But he still has to think, left foot, right foot, both feet together, ends badly. Yeah, for a little while. And then all of a sudden, there's that cheer, isn't there? It's like, oh, look, he's in all my drawers, and I have to close all my cupboards because he's got it. It just comes. They reckon, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, but is it 80% of the time, we actually aren't truly in a conscious state or a subconscious state. We're not thinking, we're just doing. And all of you are right now. And my peripheral vision's not as good as Zach's. But you're having a drink while listening to me, or you're doing this while listening to me. You're driving the car, changing clutch, gear, brake. If your car starts, which mine doesn't, did I mention that? Without thinking about it, because you've learned to do it. When, as Zach said, when you first got in that car, it was like, what? And then someone told you what you had to do, so then you had an idea of what you're supposed to do, but you still couldn't do it. And then you practiced a few times, you got better at it, And then all of a sudden, putting your mascara on, using your phone, I hope not, and off you go, because you're just doing it without thinking about it. That's what it means. Does that make it any easier? Yeah? Good. Anything, just keep putting your hands up and we'll break it down, because Zach and I have a different way of explaining it, and that works for me. So, time for a break?
Yes, 11 o'clock, so see you back here at 11:30. Thanks very much. Cool, welcome back everyone. Everyone have a good lunch. Enjoy time in the sunshine. Bless your tongue, she said to me, I'm going to go for a little walk, and then I started asking her a question, and we got into a conversation then before we knew it, the hour was up. So it's not had any sunshine at all, but that's all right. Lots of sunshine when she goes back up north. So we're just going to run through the presuppositions to see if you've had any ideas, any thoughts, any questions. Any questions at all, or generally about the whole idea of presuppositions? It's a very vague question. Good question. How did they come up with those assumptions? I think it was largely so then once they got the work, they were looking at what were the common patterns when they were working with people. So if someone said, for instance, that they failed at something, they would do what's called a reframe. So, oh, you've not failed at it, you just haven't X, Y, and Z, or you've not failed at it, you've just not found the right way to do this yet. So they made these presuppositions. Interestingly, historically, John now says to me that he's sorry he ever came up with them in the first place, because people use them as commandments. And so they haven't listened to them, they're not true. And sometimes it's quite amazing. He'll say something and they'll go, no, that's not true because of this. And he's like, you know, I came up with that idea. And he doesn't say it's a magic bag, but it's just a magic bag. And he said people use them like commandments. So I think that's why when I give them to you, I'm careful about how they're presented. So they're useful, but if they're not useful, then let them go. In terms of, well, what do you mean? How specifically? Okay, brilliant. So the same results as the results that these therapists were getting, and that's a big question about how do you measure therapeutic intervention. But one way you can do that is when someone comes in the room before your first calibration point. How do you feel? If 0 was heavily depressed, 10 was feeling great, whereabouts are you on that kind of scale? And then after you've done the work, then test it again. Interestingly, John's also very anti this idea, because he says if you want to know how someone's doing, open your eyes, listen, and calibrate yourself. I don't agree with him, which is interesting with that teacher-student relationship. I think it is important, obviously, I think it's important to calibrate, you'd hope. I won't come on about it for 2 days. But also I think it's important sometimes to check in with people, just so they can find their own sense of internal calibration. But to answer your question, that's how they were doing it. It was both what they were observing and how people were making a difference, and also what their verbal feedback was to them, and checking that they were getting into places. The most obvious example is if you've got a phobia of, I keep talking about dogs, no one has a phobia of dogs in the room, do they? Oh, you do, sorry. Does anyone have a phobia of cats? Oh, you do. Anyone have a phobia of horses? Everyone's fairly okay with horses. Cool. Yeah, nice. I joke, but it's important. You never know what things are going to not set people off. You don't seem to me like you're going to burst into tears if I say the word. But it's also not good if I keep using that example. So we'll talk about horses. So if you come to my office and you have a phobia of horses, and then you leave and you can stroke a horse, then I can see that there's some difference. Any other questions? These are really good. I jinxed it by saying they're really good and put you under pressure. But...
You know, in terms of a lot of calibration stuff, you see a change in some of that sometimes.
Yes, sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it's very subtle to the person, but it's very obvious to you. I guess a very obvious example is I saw a girl a few years ago now. She was a 15-year-old girl. She'd been self-harming quite badly. We worked together just one session, so we spent maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours together. And then the next week I saw her, and she came in quite giddy and quite chatty, and then was really, really upset about a problem she was having with an ex-boyfriend. She didn't talk about the self-harming whatsoever. And I thought that's really interesting because the week before, all she talked about was self-harming. It was the only subject that she would talk about. And whatever other subject linked back to self-harming. And then towards the end of the session, I thought, I've got to bring up the elephant in the room. As it happens now, a few years on, I probably wouldn't bring up the elephant in the room, but this was a few years ago. And I said, you know, how are your arms feeling physically? So I kept a very vague question. She was like, what do you mean? I said, well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be completely mistaken, but when we spoke to each other last week, you were worried that for a few years you've been cutting yourself and it really hurt and you didn't want to do it anymore. She was like, oh yeah, don't do that anymore. And then just carried on. And this is quite, it's not very, very common, but it's quite common across all problems that people come and see you with. And I think what it is this, is the brain really likes stasis. It really likes a story to be told that makes sense at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And if as a coach, bless you, you majorly interrupt that story with what we call a pattern interrupt. I'll go into what that is later. But if you pattern interrupt that story by doing something different, when the person comes back to see you, very often their unconscious has written a new story that makes sense to them and makes sense that doesn't involve the coach or therapist. Because it's weird for people to go and see a coach and therapist and feel better. So they tell themselves a different story, which is sometimes that problem never existed before. And the beautiful thing about this is, what better work could there be as a coach and therapist than going, the very thing they came to see me about that was blocking and controlling their whole life just doesn't even exist in their model of the world anymore. It's a terrible business plan. And tell you later on, I'm sure, in the modules we'll talk about that, because essentially as coaches and therapists, we're putting ourselves out of business constantly, because you're kind of going as fast as you can, not as fast as you can, as effectively as you can at speed, to remove yourself from that equation. Because actually the best result we can ever get is for people to not need us anymore because they're their own coach. They've got that fishing rod and they've built it. So it's about working that out. Anything else? These are really, really useful questions.
You just said,
Right. Brilliant. So if I say don't think about pink elephant, everyone's thinking about pink elephant, right? So it's the thing we're thinking about in the room. Part of it is about elegance with language. So if I'm working with someone who is very angry about their teacher at school, so a young man who's very angry about his teacher at school, I can ask him all about that anger, and we can work on it, and then we can do some sort of intervention which removes that anger. One of the last things I want to do when he returns to me is ask him how angry he's feeling, because even if he wasn't feeling angry, I might send him to that place that his brain used to be. So I've got to find other ways of doing it, which is, so I might throw in that teacher's name and just calibrate what the difference is. Or how do you feel about the teacher now would be a less elegant way to do it, but better than saying how angry are you now, implying there's still some anger. So the self-harming thing would be an extension of that in a more dramatic way. So if they've stopped self-harming absolutely entirely, what I don't want to do then is then replant the seed or re-trigger something off by asking about the self-harming. So what I would be more now is confident in my skills in calibrating and going, this person's in a different place than they were before. I can see there's no fresh self-harming marks, for instance. I might ask a few more questions around the subject, but I probably wouldn't say directly what's been happening with the self-harming. I don't criticize my previous self for asking about it, though. It's better to be safe than sorry. So I'm always looking for elegance, but actually before elegance, just making sure that we're safe. And if that means checking in, then that's a check-in. But I think it would be more elegant to not go back there. I had an open frame plan for about 20 minutes where anyone could ask any questions. We've moved into it already, though, which is great. Any other questions about anything? And they can really be as out there, or whatever it might be. I can't promise on that. Helen.
the story of NLP, so there's three main involved, one which Frank, but the next one is separation. What happened to Frank? Did he stay in the 30?
Sure, no, this is a really good question. So these guys who went to the NLP dinner last night will probably attest to this. The NLP is all about the modelling of excellence, but what it's become is about communication skills, about training, about being your best self, about punching the air. And without criticising the entire field, I will criticise the entire field and say it's full of people who don't have the best communication skills. And what's interesting is, so John and Richard, I'll talk about Frank in a second, carried on NLP for years. And then they had a very historic split where they haven't talked to each other in, I think, 20, 25 years. Right? Exactly. And I think it's also, demonstrates that you've got to live your stuff and walk and talk your stuff. I only have John's side of the story, so naturally I take his side of the story. And Richard sounds like a very difficult man, but I'm sure John, if he wants to be difficult, can be difficult too. I try not to get into the kind of personalities and situation of it, because I just don't think it's helpful for the application. But to come back to your question, Frank graduated, so went off and just didn't want to be involved with that stuff anymore. Funnily enough, him and John have started to collaborate together now, but they're in their late 70s, early 80s. So I think a lot of it is they're kind of historically looking over what they did on their life rather than getting new stuff out there. But yeah, that's what happened. So, yeah, I mean, there is a thing that, and you're right, it's completely ironic that two people who have changed the world with communication skills can form a functioning relationship to work together. I think there was even a murder trial in there as well, not with each other, but I really don't know the details. We're talking a pretty dramatic breakdown in communication. I don't know if you've heard any of that kind of, I'm certainly aware of it, that NLP can sometimes have a bad rep in kind of the wider world. Often people have used it and hear really good stuff about it. In some circles it can have a bad rep. And I think understandably so, because the people who have been demonstrating it haven't always walked and talked their thing. But I think it's about not shooting the message because you're shooting the messenger. I don't want to shoot them, don't worry. But if we're going to say, well, the messengers weren't brilliant, it doesn't mean the message can't still have some really good use to it.
I didn't necessarily believe it, right?
Yeah.
I did a bit of everything. Like it's not relevant, it's not.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think a really good example of that is with the REP systems. So when schools heard about the REP systems, it became this major revolution in the education system where teachers had to use visual learnings, they had to use auditory learnings and kinesthetic learnings. It became a really, really, really big thing. And I think for a while, I think this was under Tony Blair, so probably 1997, a little bit on, it became really targeted about if you're going to make a lesson plan, it has to be a third visual, a third kinesthetic, a third auditory. So you're constantly hitting kids with it all the time. And then inevitably there was a backlash where people went, actually, there isn't this scientific evidence, isn't that strong, that kids are split a third in this way. So then what they did, in my opinion, was threw the baby out the bathwater, and there's been a backlash against this stuff now where they go, in schools, teachers must not teach rep systems, or specialist consultants who come in when they work for some companies and mustn't talk about rep systems. But what I think they're doing, again, is blurring what's true, what's plausible, and what's useful. And the phrase I always have is, if it's plausible, that's completely fine, it's probably useful. And I think there's an ethical thing there about not presenting this truth. So just because it's plausible doesn't mean I'm going to say, this is absolutely true in all cases. But I think it's odd to then not use what's useful just because it's not true in all circumstances. I can't think of anything really in life that's ever true in every single circumstance. Right. And is there ever an event where something will work for everyone? It's interesting, isn't it? Anything else? Any other kind of seeds or plants? This isn't your last chance to ask a question. To see if there's anything else brewing about anything to do with coaching or therapy, or course, future. No? Good. Presuppositions then. And I'm just we're not going to spend ages on them because they're not things that you've either understood or you haven't understood. I just want to make sure there's a basic understanding for now that when you see the sentence, you kind of go, I get an idea of where it's going at, and I need to think about it a little bit more. I need to maybe ask questions about it. If you see the sentence and you think, I really just don't get that at all, please put your hand up. There's probably someone else who feels like that in the group, and we'll explore that one a bit more. So the map is not the territory. It's one of the more obscure ones, actually. How do people feel about this? Okay. Is there anyone where this isn't resonating with them at all yet? The map is not the territory. Okay, that's fair enough. Let me find another way to put the map is not the territory. So I think I put this in my pre-read, that you know we can have those A to Z maps. I mean, we hardly have them anymore now because we've got GPS. I'm usually following the blue dot. This kind of but we've got the A to Z maps, or we've got our GPS. And we can map out perfectly well what Regent's University in the inner circle looks like. We can see every kind of road. I didn't know this until recently, but in big shops like John Lewis, they actually go into John Lewis with the machines because they need to map out if there's like paths in John Lewis that can be a quicker cut through from Oxford Circus to, I think, Wimpole Road. They actually go into shops and GPS them. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant. But it's funny how you can go on these tangents but then still end up in the same place if you know exactly where your intention is to get. So you've got the A4 maps and you've got your GPS. But I don't really know what the inside of Regent's University is like until I actually take a walk around Regent's University. And that's because the map is literally not the territory. The territory is the thing that actually exists, and the map is just a representation of that. You with me so far? I'm now going to, if everyone feels like they understand, I'm now going to confuse you again and confuse myself. So I can go walking around Regent's University, and I can have a pretty good idea that I'm in the territory, right? But I'm in my territory, I'm not in your territory. Because you might walk through Regent's University, and your thoughts might be, this is a beautiful place, it's sunny. Or I might walk through on a rainy day and go, God, this is grim, it's a bit like a prison. Not that it is, just an example. So the weather might affect how we feel about the territory. But also it's deeper than that still. Because if we both walk through on a sunny day, my relationship to sun might be a completely different relationship to Emma's relationship. So she just went sunbathing for like 10 minutes. Can you show us the difference between the two sides? It's clearly affected her quite quickly. I'm guessing if she spends a long time in the sun, you probably burn and it hurts, right? I'm lucky I don't really burn, so I absolutely love the sun and I can spend hours out in there. So my relationship to the sun is probably different to Emma's. So if we both walk through Regent's University on a sunny day for a long period of time, although we're walking through the same territory, it's just a representation of how we feel about that territory. Everyone still with me? And this is happening in every moment, in every communication ever, that what we think we're talking about isn't necessarily what the other person is picking up on. So one of the best things we can do is, go again? Brilliant. It means the answer to every question. To calibrate. So does this person think the same things I'm thinking? Are we on a similar page with this? Are we using the same kind of language? Do we have the same relationship to this? And we can only really do that by looking, watching, listening. And if we don't feel like we're good enough yet to watch and listen, what else can we do? I've got someone in front of me, I'm trying to gain rapport with them. I'm not quite sure if we feel the same about this situation. What's the other thing I can do? Floss. Sorry, I mean, absolutely. There's always a room for floss. The answer is easier than you think it might be. Awesome, brilliant, exactly. And I really want to put that in here because this stuff isn't, it can seem like magic, and it is a magic bag. But it doesn't have to be magic. It can be asking someone a question. You know, how do you feel about that? Or this is my opinion on it. What's your opinion on it? And it's really, really good to seek that clarification. I call it belt and braces. So you're putting your seatbelt on, and you also have your braces to make sure your trousers don't fall down. So you've got both going on. Not a seatbelt, a trouser belt and braces, exactly. It doesn't work otherwise. And you're just making sure that you've got both things there, and it's always fine to ask people. Always fine? Is there ever a time when it's not okay? Right, exactly. So it's context dependent. It's also about permission. I could go to the barista at Costa, and I could say to him or her, tell me about your dead goldfish from when you're 4 years old. I don't have permission to do that. I don't have consent to do that. So again, it's about boundaries and making sure that that permission is in there. But if you're in a coaching context and someone's consenting to be there, it's probably a good idea to check that you're on the same page about something. Map is not the territory. Each person is unique. I'm guessing we're all good with this one. These ones are quite instinctive. The law of requisite variety, ignore that sentence. This afternoon, more than any other afternoon on the course, is quite full of lingo and terminology. If I'm really honest, one of the reasons why I keep that lingo in there is out of respect for John. So he came up with these sentences, and it feels naughty to take his ideas, to rebrand them and repackage them, and not give credit to what he originally called them. If that is an obstacle for you, though, as I know it is for Ali, for instance, she's quite open about that, ignore it. You don't need to know the title of it. The second reason I give it, it's not just out of respect, is as your minds kind of tick about things unconsciously, some of these sentences, because they're longer, can land a little bit later on. If you just give someone information, then it doesn't tick over in the same way. if something's a little bit confusing, it gives you the next few weeks for things to tick over between now and then. So if it's bothering you and if it's an obstacle, don't worry about it. In fact, don't worry about anything ever. Just relax about it. Incidentally, that was really bad language on my part. What sentence did I just use? Don't. Right. Why would I say to a room of people, don't worry? That's like a pink elephant, right? I could say relax. So it's not just about phrasing things in the positive, but it's about phrasing things in where you want people to place their attention. So things like don't, whatever that word was, and kick out the door, because just focusing on relaxing more. Law of requisite variety. Having choice is better than no choice. How do you feel about this? Is there anyone that this doesn't sit right with yet? And that's completely fine.
Sometimes, yeah, well, it's not saying that you're having too much choice, but sometimes other language will not have too much.
Right.
You get to a point that you're like, oh,
And I think Hannah's instinct here.
particularly with children, sometimes if they've got too much choice, they can't. It's like we have all that.
Right, absolutely. Sometimes we need a framework. So the gym. I think it's something that everyone can relate to at some point that they thought, well, not even the gym, just I want to exercise more or I want to keep healthy. There's one way of doing this. Oh, sorry, there's lots of ways. There's one way of doing this, which is to go to the gym and exercise. If you're going to the gym and exercise, obviously there's lots of ways to exercise. But if you specifically want to go to the gym and exercise, there's only one way to do that. There's hundreds of ways of not doing that. Hundreds of techniques and tricks people use and I use to find very good reasons not to do it. Oh, the kids are being a bit noisy. I need to go deal with that right now. Oh, my foot's a little bit sore. Maybe I shouldn't go to the gym right now. I'm going to watch a box set of Friends instead, something like that. One of the key ways of not going to the gym is by making it so vague that you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'll go at some point, but I'm not going to go right now because I don't need to go right now. It's more important that I feel happy and comfortable right now. Now, that doesn't make sense because if someone said to you, how would you be more happy and comfortable in that moment, and you drilled down to it, it would probably be by getting fit, feeling healthy, feeling stuff. But we don't ask those further questions. We just go, yeah, I'd just rather focus on being happy and healthy right now. So that's one way of not going to the gym, and that's probably the most common way. There's another way, though, which is less common, which is to give ourselves too much choice. We think about every step it takes to get to the gym because I'd have to log in, and then I'd have to remember my password to get to the internet. Then I'd have to go on the computer. Then I'd have to use a website, and it might be slow to load. I've got to find the right number to call to ask the gym about membership, and they might put me through to like a personal trainer rather than customer service. Then I've got to find the right person to get a gym membership. Then I've got to work out how in my schedule I'm going to get to the gym. Then I've got to get the right pair of shoes because let's face it, they've got to match my sweatpants. Otherwise, my jogging bottoms are going to look the wrong colour. Then I'm going to have to decide whether to walk because, of course, I know I should walk to the gym because driving to the gym is ridiculous, but it's just like a little bit too far that I can't. You get where I'm going, right? So you're giving yourself so much choice and so much information that you're really drilling down into so much information. But actually, having too much choice can be better than having no choice. Also, having no choice can be better than too much choice, which is go to the gym. However, I'm glad you're so compliant. In a coaching context, we very, very rarely, if never, want to go do this because we're taking power and ownership as the coach over the person in front of us. There's two reasons we don't do that. One, it's unethical, right? We don't want to be telling people what to do. We want people to make their own choices. And two, to be honest, it probably won't work. Unless you have incredible rapport and sense of security and the person really trusts you, then it might go somewhere. But generally, our brains are pretty clever. We reject stuff that people are giving us unless we find our own way to own it. It's the same reason why I'm not just giving you information, because you'd hear it, and if you didn't like it, just throw it out. It's better to get people to work for things. So I think you're right. I think there's examples where this is not true. I think generally as a guiding principle or a learning principle, it's a good place to go. Does that make sense?
Also, it's like coaching doesn't
Or client, yeah.
Rather than saying you have to go to the gym, you can make it more of a discussion, helping them to bring out ideas.
Brilliant. And throwing that out there, how might I phrase that then? I'm having a question with someone who I know wants to go to the gym. They're having problems finding the motivation to do it. What kind of question might I ask? Amazing. So can you see how Julie there is pushing them in the direction they want to go? She's not really pushing them, in fact, she's encouraging them to come in the direction they're already facing. But also, you're still giving them choice. That first step could be anything. It could be to put my shoes on. It could be to buy that gym membership. It could be to go, actually, no, I don't want to go. I'm going back to sleep. The choice is still there, but we've phrased the choice in a way that gives it a closer frame. Yeah? Brilliant. And I'm going to agree with Emily. I'm also going to disagree with her, which is my favourite thing to do, is agree and disagree with someone. It's not that some people will come and see you because they're stuck. I would say everyone will come and see you because they're stuck. Otherwise, they won't be in the room. They're stuck at something, even if they want to get better at something. They're just stuck in that moment. And sometimes that stuck is there's a lot of stuck. Or sometimes I'm just a bit stuck. I'm stuck at the moment right now because, do you know Insanity, the workout DVD? So there's a workout DVD you can do every day at home. Last year I did it every day for 60 days and I got super fit from doing it. But I know what hard work it is. And I keep thinking about doing it. And so now I'm still in a room of people. The next time I see you, I'll have done every day until then. And also, if you say something out loud, you're more likely to do it. So I'm saying it to a group of people that Emily has now unstuck me just from this little intervention in saying that although I'm not particularly stuck, for some reason I've not been doing it, and now I'm agreeing to do it. So do you see what I mean? That stuck can sometimes be a very little thing, sometimes it can be a huge thing. But I say always people come in your room because they're stuck in some ways. And that sentence is completely untrue, because I'm sure there is an exception that I don't know. Every behaviour has a positive intention. I feel like we've dealt with this one, right? Mind and body is one system, and we must respect the ecology. This one, I'm hoping everyone's a little bit confused by, because it's a huge subject. And we're not going to drill down into it now, because it's going to be present throughout the entire course. Always checking in with how is one thing affecting another, how is that affecting another. And you've already been doing it. So when I talked about that we've worked on rapport and now sensory acuity, you'll notice I constantly go back to rapport, I constantly go back to calibration. Because these things aren't separate things, they're all part of one big jigsaw. And everything we do with a client is part of one big jigsaw. Every decision we make is part of our big jigsaw, which is part of the global jigsaw, which is part of the universe jigsaw. I won't get any higher than that, so I'm going to get very hippie, but it is part of the one kind of soul jigsaw, so jigsaws. Meaning of communication is the response you get. This one's a controversial one. Can anyone explain what they think it might mean? Right. Yeah, it makes complete sense, right? So if my intention in the morning is to relax everybody, but actually everyone's really annoyed at me and waving their fists at me, I can probably realize that I've miscalibrated somewhere and that I've said something that hasn't gone down well. Now, I can sulk about it and go, oh, those lot, they just don't get it. Or I can take responsibility for my communication and say, what exactly is it? Was it my tone of voice? Was it how I was standing? Was it the words I used? Was it the time of day? I can have a rethink about what exactly have I done to provoke that response. Now, this really isn't true, because I can, yes, I have got an example. I got on the tube a few days ago, and the tube buzzer went beep, 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 as in the doors are closing. And there was a man just stood there blocking the doors, and there was clearly quite a lot of space. Now, normally, when that situation happens, might not surprise you, I'm not particularly shy. And something I like to do, because I think it's polite and also makes a point, is I'll call people out by what they're wearing and just politely say, could the lady in the green dress move down, please? Could the man in the bow tie move down, please? And very quickly, everyone moves down. And so it's not aggressive. I'm not picking a fight with anyone. I'm just pointing out they're blocking the way and encouraging people to move. And 99.9% of the time, it works. Did it on this time, and the man did not move. I was just like, if the man blocking the doors, could you move, please? Still very deliberately blocked it. Now, if the thing hadn't been going beep, 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 probably would have gone to another door, or I would have thought, I don't need to get on this tube right now. I think I was late for work or something like that. So I stepped over him. I did physically push him, but we physically touched as I stepped over him. He pushed me really hard, and suddenly the whole tube's like, what is going on here? And he said, I won't repeat the language you used, but it wasn't, something you broadcast on BBC One at 7 p.m. I immediately, because I could hear the tube carriage was there, I did feel in physical danger. He was bigger than me, and I thought he's physically pushed me at this point. He's clearly angry. I made a joke. I looked around the carriage and went, this is awkward. And that did diffuse it a little bit. But he was glaring at me and glaring at me. And then I made another joke. I can't remember what I said. And then I calibrated that these jokes weren't working. The audience, so to speak, were with me. They clearly had seen now that this guy was being unfair, but no one was willing at this point to step in and do something about it. It crossed my mind, genuinely consciously in that moment. I thought I'd been completely reasonable right now. I've made a joke. I've apologised for touching him, but I've explained it's blocking the door. And the meaning of the communication is the response I get. So I could go at that point, this man is being so unreasonable, I've done something wrong. And I could take that on. Or I could go, there's something going on in this man's life right now that I don't know what this is about, and I'm just going to step away and move away from the situation. So in real life, necessarily, I don't think this is always true. I think it's a good guideline to think about in our interactions and relationships with people, but I also think it's important to know that there is a boundary, that there's sometimes that there's other stuff going on for people, and we can only communicate as best we can. Incidentally, I didn't, with this story, save myself. Another guy was so quick thinking, it must have only come from his unconscious. He turned to me, he went, Chris! Put his arm around me and took me away. I was so confused what was going on. But he did it so fast that I moved and then realised what he was doing. And then he went, you look like you do with a hand. And it was just really, really sweet of him and nice. So that was someone very quick thinking who just diffused the situation. But anyway, that's my point. I think this is a really good, helpful guidelines, and there's time when it's just not necessarily true. There is no failure or any feedback. We've kind of covered that, right? We already have all the resources within us for everything we need. So this underlines the entire training. This is why I don't know how many questions I've asked you guys since yesterday morning, but it's probably hitting the hundreds. I try to do less sentences and more asking you questions and sharing the information, because the information is all there already. All we're doing is pulling it out and mixing it around and putting it back in. But when you've got a client in front of you, or a coachee, which I like that word, one of the things that you're doing is recognizing that they're the expert on them. They know a lot more about themselves, about why they're upset, what their relationship with their parents is, why they're not getting on with that particular teacher, or why they're worried about the future. We don't have that information. And all we're doing is, if we get too involved in that information without asking questions, is we're imposing our maps on their territory. That's so important, I'll repeat it again. We're imposing our maps on their territory. So one of the best things we can do is keep out of their territory, respect their territory, but don't put our map into it. And how we do that is something we're going to move on to very, very shortly. But this one's really important, to recognize that that person is the expert on that person. And although you'll soon be the experts in the coaching, because you have the skills and the interventions, you will never, no matter what skill level you get, ever be the expert in another person. I think it's always really important to learn that. Also, there's a guy called Bill Cummings, who does some strange work, leave it at that. But he has one phrase which I love, which is, every single person you meet has more to teach you than you could ever learn. And I just think it's a really nice phrase. But, and I try and remember it with, I'm trying to phrase this and sound polite, but I'll let polite go. When you meet someone who's really, really strange, and they're just really difficult in your life, I find it a really helpful frame just to think, actually, when I'm spending this time with this strange person, they can teach me more than I ever know if I just ask the right questions. Because we all have the resources inside us and everything. And even if it's not true, then it makes the time go faster. You cannot not influence. We definitely covered that yesterday. And then we're on to clean language. What do you think clean language might mean? Fantastic. So, or reduce your influence. So, to try not to presuppose that you know about things, to try and reduce your influence on someone. Right, that was much cleaner. What would be the purpose of this? Why do we not? Why do we want to reduce our influence on people? Seems a strange thing to do if we're coaches. Right. So it's going to come from them. It's clean. It's what their ideas of things are. Now, there's a time when clean language isn't useful. There's a time when we absolutely want to influence where someone's come using the stuff they've given us. But the crucial thing is for stuff they've given us. What we're talking about right now is more Module 3 and Module 4 stuff. So we won't worry for now. We'll relax for now. We'll relax for now about knowing when we're going to use this stuff to influence someone. For now, we're going to work on just being completely clean. To come back to Emily's job, I guess this is walking into the crime scene, not affecting anything at all. So we can move things around and we can adjust things, but nothing is there that wasn't there in the first place. We've just maybe cleaned stuff. No, cleaning won't work, would it? We've maybe, I've got the metaphor. I'm making the metaphor as I go. We have the crime scene, it's a bit dark and it's a bit messy. We can't move anything around because we're going to make it messier. What can we do? It's dark. We can get a light and we can illuminate it. And that's what clean language is. It's finding the areas of the room or the areas of the map that they haven't found for themselves yet. Now, crucially, the light isn't important for me. It's not my room. So I can be guiding the light, but actually I don't need to see this stuff. It's their room, it's their territory. I'm kind of trying not to be nosy, actually. How could they use that light? Go, Kaz. Amazing. Give them the torch. Let them find that room themselves, because there might be something in that room that makes the whole room appear different. So this is a strange example, but it's a crime scene. They're very upset that their room is a crime scene. But actually, when we shine the light over there, there's a big camera woman and a director and a whole crew. And it's suddenly a very different crime scene, right? It's a crime scene from a film. So shining light and finding new information can change the entire context of something. Clean language can be a really, really good way to do that. Just before we go into it, a story of actually, no more stories. We'll go into clean language. Can I borrow someone? And just grab your chair if that's the right time. Now, this is one of the first times on this course that I'm about to give you a model or a structure. The temptation when you've got the model and structure is to then forget that we've spent 2 days working on rapport, sensory acuity, and calibration. The structure that's about, actually, just periphery, the structure that's about to come on the screen is 1,692 times, made up number, less important than the rapport, calibration, and sensory acuity. So I just want to really flag that now, that just because we're moving on to a new thing, that it's a bit like another ball to juggle, make sure that above all else things, we're in rapport, that we're watching and listening, and that we're calibrating. So clean language, I'm going to ask Diane to think of a subject, and I'm going to ask her to think about the subject that makes her happiest in the world that's clean. And why are you doing it? What subject is that?
Sea swimming.
Sea swimming?
Swimming in the sea.
Oh, sea swimming, okay, got it. And how does sea swimming make you feel? Great. And what kind of alive is that?
Playful and connected with nature.
Playful, fun, and connected with nature. And is there anything else about that playful, fun, and connected with nature?
Free.
And do you notice anything else about free?
I feel myself. Feel myself.
And what else do you notice about feeling yourself? Great, I will end that. So you can see how some very kind of ubiquitous questions, you know, there's ubiquitous is a big word, isn't it? I don't really know what it means. Some questions that are very, they don't have much flair to them. They're just very simple questions, right? And all I'm doing is taking Diane's data and putting them into those questions. But you could already see from calibrating and sensory acuity that Diane was on a journey there. She was feeling that swimming in the sea. She was feeling playful, fun, and connected. She was feeling herself. And all of those things are going on. Now, just because we're only on module 1 of the course, we're not going to work on other stuff yet. But I'm sure how you could see if someone said that they were feeling upset about something, I said, what kind of upset is that? You can get all sorts of useful information about this. Now, as I was showing that demonstration, I was doing something really naughty that I couldn't help but do. What do you think I might have been doing that wasn't in my language, that wasn't clean? I'm going to give another example. Can you just talk about being playful, free, and connected again? Just say, I feel
playful, free, and connected.
How can you say you felt free?
Free.
So I'm nodding, which isn't entirely clean. Really what I want to be doing is receiving the information and not giving it any judgment at all, and then firing it back. Because the rapport is strong, it's very tricky, because when she's smiling and happy and nodding, I'm kind of nodding with her. And to be honest, that is fine. I don't have a huge problem with that. But if I'm teaching clean language, and I'm really, really teaching clean language, it's a very neutral state where you're just asking these questions. I'm going to be honest, I think as coaches, you'll never be in this neutral state and just asking questions. But it's a really good thing to practice for that. Does that make sense?
I think because I think sometimes it's the flip side, isn't it? So sometimes when they say something, maybe that's really horrible,
Yeah.
we over-emphasise.
Yeah, like me going, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And all you're then doing is reinforcing the fact that this is terrible and you're sorry you had to go through that. Which is why it's really not an issue if you're nodding about someone enjoying something, but it's good to practice it. Does that all make sense? Thank you, Dan. Round of applause. Oh, can we leave the chair there for 1 moment? I can get one more volunteer just to do exactly the same thing. One more volunteer just to do the same thing. I mean, you know what questions you're about to be asked. Excellent. So, Emily, what makes you happiest in the world? That's clear. Reading books. And what do you feel like when you read books? And what kind of content is that? And is there anything else about that relaxed, chilled out escapist? Okay. And do you notice anything else about even the don't think so? Just that. And what else do you notice about that? Just that. And that's completely fine. A round of applause. And again, really nice demonstration that's not necessarily slick because she's not filled in every answer and given you something useful. But you're seeing an authentic response that sometimes only takes 1 question or 2 questions. You'd like to think that if I was coaching this in real life, I would have calibrated that and stopped asking after question 2. But obviously, when you're giving a demonstration. Does that make sense? Julie?
What happens if you can't remember what you said to? It's like being higher, playful, fun, connected with nature. Can you remember 2 out of 3, or
Right.
you're stumbling then, or?
Can anyone else answer this for me? What to do if you can't remember your swim? Brilliant. So that's one option. Can you repeat what you just said? And I'll give
I
you.
mean, like, you know, when you ask that question, is there anything else about that? About what you said? Sort of element.
Right. Oh, okay. So you repeat the
That
same
makes
question.
sense.
Yeah, totally. The only thing is you might get a different response to that. And although that doesn't make any logical sense, because you think if you ask someone a question, they'll give you an answer. You ask the same question again, they might give you a different answer because they're in a slightly different emotional place.
Yeah.
It's still not a problem. It's still just information.
What did you say? So when she said, "Oh, makes me feel free,"
Yeah.
and she said 2 other things with that, and you could remember them. You'd say, "Is there anything more about that feeling free?" And what? I'm not.
I know, I see what you're saying.
Now, see, I'm not.
No, that's really nice. So you give the first one and then see if they fill in number 2 and 3.
Yeah, and then so you still asking the 3rd question more about those things.
Right.
Just asking them to remember what they said.
I think that's brilliant. And I think it's a really good demonstration of magic bag thinking. So this isn't a magic spell. It's not that you need to ask question 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 in that exact order. These are just indications of how to keep clean. And what you're saying there would still be clean. You'd be saying that. Not just with my language, but did anyone else notice anything else that I did with Emily in terms of physiology, body language? So she said that it was, I can't remember what the word was exactly, and did the same action. If you can do actions, it's a really good way of building rapport too, is to repeat the same action that they gave.
You just said about
Not nodding.
but then repeating it.
Right.
It's Diana that's nodding, but nodding different from what happened.
It's a very good distinction. So the nodding, this is going to be confusing, so let me clean it up. The nodding from Diane was on certain words. And then when Zach nodded, he wasn't repeating her words, he was nodding. When Emily did that, when Zach said that same word, he gave the same action to the same word. So I was literally directly taking what Emily did and repeating it. With Diane, he was slightly interpreting. He was hearing the words and then going. It's not a huge issue to get hung up on. It's just a really clean way of doing it. Also, to answer Julia's question, so we've got one way, which is to ask them to repeat it. What else can we do if we can't remember what they said?
Children say things sometimes too quick, or when they're in that state. And I often say to them, oh, I got that, I got feet, but I didn't hear all of it.
Okay, yeah.
And they'll often then,
Give
say
more.
that, yeah, but it's usually long-winded. Yeah. When you have to go, all right, so I got feet on shoes. So what was the first bit? I'm
Right.
sorry, I didn't. And I usually take it on myself. There's my hearing, or because sometimes they're too squealy and I go, my hearing, I can't remember that pitch.
Nice.
Down, and they kind of think, and then we do another one, and then we have to come up with something slightly different. And then in the end, they repeated it all some amount of long time down.
I think that's really nice. So if I was going to wear two hats, is I've got my Ollie hat and then I've got my clean language hat. My Ollie hat goes, that's perfect. My clean language hat goes, it's not entirely clean, because if we're talking about squealing in ears, we're giving a slight judgment to what we're hearing.
Yeah.
So Penny Tompkins and David Grove, who have done a lot of work on this, would go, oh, I don't know if that's clean. Put my Ollie hat back on, it's fine. So as long as we're doing what we're doing sensitively and we know why we're doing it and what our intention is, then there's no need to be purist about it. Yeah.
Oh, I can't believe it.
It's much
You
more
know, it's
informal.
all in the acting and the playing, sitting down on the floor, they're in the corner, and
Definitely.
what's that mean? So there's a lot more to it than just like,
Indeed. And I think there's one other option. Can I borrow your pen and pad just for a second? I'm not actually going to write. So suppose I'm with Julie and I'm doing this exercise. I'm not a fan of writing at all while I do work, as in coaching work. This is very, very, very subjective. And I would say I'm unusual in that sense. I think most coaches do like to take notes as they go and do like to write. And we'll talk more about that. But all I'd say is it's perfectly acceptable to say, what kind of X is that, Julie? And then you just give me an answer. Fun. The only crucial thing, though, is that when I'm writing it down and then I'm reading it, is that I'm looking at it and then I'm asking the question once I've looked at it. What you don't want to be doing is, what kind of fun is that? Why don't I want to be doing that? I can't calibrate, I can't use sensory acuity. And that's something I see that's quite common in coaches if they don't nip it up and now, which is they get very used to writing and it becomes coaching to their paper. Nothing wrong with writing things down. It helps you relax in the room and have better rapport because this is one time you're not worrying. You're not worrying about forgetting what they're going to say. Do it. It's no problem at all. I'd invite you to wonder how good your short-term memory is. And then if you practice a little bit and not taking notes, you won't need to know more. But it's a perfectly good step into getting to that. That makes sense? Great. So you probably know what's coming, but if you can, in a moment, sorry. Again, Ollie hat, yes. Clean language hat, no, because you're giving judgment on what it is. So if you say one thing and I don't nod, then you might calibrate as the client. Oh, sorry, let's do this the other way around. You say statement A and I nod, and then you say statement B and I don't nod. You then go, oh, he agreed with statement A, but he doesn't agree with statement B. And it's not my job as the coach to be agreeing or disagreeing with you. It's just my job to be listening and firing these questions back at you. So again, we can relax about all of these things. It's just about being aware of when we get to later work, really not doing the, oh, that's terrible, or oh my God, I'm sorry you went through that. Because then we are reinforcing and then that's more problematic. In this sense, we can relax about it, just have the intention to be clean and see how you go.
So, you avoid saying, okay, then before you start
Exactly. Again, not going to die on the wall about it. So if you say okay, it's pretty clean. Ideally, though, we don't want to say, okay, ideally, we just want to repeat the words they've used and put it into this sentence structure. It's that idea of meta that we were talking about this morning. This is all meta. You're not getting lost in their story and the content of their story. You're looking above from the story with a structure and keeping out of it. You're keeping out of their territory. You're just helping them shine a light in the room. Right.
Because they don't know.
Indeed. So I would always give a don't know. Is there anything else about that don't know? Because often there is. With Emily, there wasn't, but sometimes the question is strange enough that someone goes back in and they notice there's a feeling. That's more with negative feelings, to be honest, because most of us are pretty aware of our positive feelings and they're kind of on the surface. A feeling that isn't so great maybe needs to be dug up a little bit more. I would very rarely do this in coaching in this way, so I would more throw these questions at random times. So someone might give a metaphor or an idea and ask, do you notice anything else about that raging white wall? Do you notice anything else about that feeling in your stomach? Do you notice anything else about that voice that you hear just before you go to bed? I don't often run through the four. This is just to get us used to these questions.
If you've got a situation where something sounds absolutely terrible,
Right.
and it is quite a bit of that, "Ooh," and you don't want to say, "Oh, that's terrible," like you say, to reinforce it. Can you just say something like, "Thank you for being honest about your situation," or something like that, or would you not even say that?
Okay. Clean language.
Mm-hmm.
No, I wouldn't say that. Ollie hat on. You'd be crazy if you didn't say that. Like, you've got a human being in front of you. Of
Yeah.
course, you want to have that moment of empathy where you say, "Thank you for being honest with me." And I have no problem at all with anyone thanking someone for authenticity, and I think it's rapport building. I think the key, we'll come back to this a lot, is it's about furthering the client's journey and helping them achieve their needs, as opposed to because you need to feel better or you need to feel comfortable in that situation. So it always has to be about what is their need as a priority in this moment than what you need. Would you have anything to add to that, Alex? I feel like that's a Ollie-esque question.
I think, this is going to, of course, but I think that one of the things that we're going to try and take home here is that we are never going to be sat in front of the same person ever again. Everybody's taking it different. So there will be children and adults where if they said something really horrible, I still use clean language because I need to not get lost in their story. But, "Oh, poor you, I'm not helping them, I'm a victim there as well." And they need me to stay above it. So I do use clean language with knowledge. And with children as well. When we have disclosures, especially, the last thing I can do is wrap my arms around them and go, "Oh my God, that man's like, I can't do that," because it affects what's going to happen next. Because this stuff will come on to you. So I do use clean language. But what I would say was, as you grow as therapists, and teachers, mums, and all of you, not even teachers, mums, all of you in this room will know what is needed in that situation. And as much as I try and keep it clear, because I know it doesn't help the client if it's not, sometimes I do have to just trust my gut. But that is something to learn, and it's something, again, you're unconsciously already doing as much as
Yes.
Like say, we often speak knowledge their situation. We often say, "I can see you're upset. I can see you're cross about, you're not usually cross, but you're cross about. See you're upset about this. I can see you're feeling maybe sad."
I'm not upset, I'm angry.
Yeah, and then when they come back like that, what kind of
Actually, you joke, but then that is a beautiful way of getting rapport. It's finding a particular way of doing it. So it might be, what kind of anger is that? So we're kind of running with it. And we've got to be careful though of, so if I've said I'm upset, and you've said,
I usually say, I can see there's something wrong, or I can see.
"Oh, there's nothing wrong, I'm just a bit moody."
Yeah, and they go, "Oh, all right," and then often that's a just off your way. And,
All of these things I'm coming to any second now is that you're making more work for yourself.
Right.
Because what you're giving there is the potential for me to disagree with you, based on a word that you've come up with that I haven't given you, on a state that I might not necessarily be feeling, because our maps aren't the same.
Yeah.
So I could be coming to this room and throw stuff about, and that's not normal behaviour, but actually it is normal behaviour for me. It's how I get up in the mornings, it's my morning exercise. So if you say to me, "What are you angry about?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm not angry, I'm just doing my normal morning exercise." or to put it a better way, you know that phrase "resting bitch face" that people have when it's just a neutral kind of expression, and then there's that horrible thing that you go, "Is there something wrong?" There's nothing wrong at all. Whereas it's much better to get clean questions, get the information from them, and give you information back. Ali.
The only thing I'd add to that, and again, it's further down the line because we have no idea when you get to the purpose. But when we're working with Rory, those of you that have seen what we do and looked at the video, I tend to work with the part of them that is that feeling. So by disassociating and working with that part, that does give me a little bit more of a license around the screen language. Because then I can say to that part, oh yeah, he does look sad. Because the child's back here with me, not part of it. But again, further down the field. So as Zach was saying, it's a different way, but Ollie does give us options to do some interesting stuff with that gives you a little bit more power.
Nice. So in a pair, there's two questions that are missing from this sheet, which you might want to note down, which is what makes you happy and how do you feel when you're, what makes you happiest and what do you feel when you're doing that? So what makes you happiest and what do you feel when you're doing that? And then the questions then will become obvious. So what makes you happiest and how do you feel about that? No, that's all. Okay, good question. So Hannah's asking, if a sentence doesn't work grammatically, does that annoy people or does that upset people? So my honest answer is, again, I feel like I'm repeating it and it's completely fine, is that I very rarely go through this structure in this way. They're very unconscious within me. So I would find another way to phrase that question to then put that X in. I just didn't want to do that when I demonstrated because then you've got another thing to think about, which is why is that changing the structure of the sentence that's in front of me? And the second thing though is if it did bother you and I calibrated that it bothered you, it's only good more information. What's going on for you right now? I'm feeling frustrated. What kind of frustration is that? It's really frustrated because it's not grammatically true. Is there anything else about that frustration? Yeah, it reminds me of when I get frustrated when my mum slams the door to my bedroom. And so you then might go to a really interesting place or it might go nowhere, but it's all just extra information and that's always handy. So in a pair, I'm going to give you 10 minutes, so it's 5 minutes each. For you to ask these, it's 6 questions really, and then swap over. So 10 minutes, it's 5 minutes each in a pair to ask these 6 questions, so just notice what comes about. Last final thought before you do it. The questions are great, clean language is great, much greater and much more important, rapport, sensory acuity and calibration. Make sure that those are in place before you start to ask questions and maintain them as best you can. Thank you. Let's stay go. Let's stay later. Thanks. Cool. What did we notice? Felt strange. What specifically felt strange? It's quite direct, isn't it? Yeah. That wasn't clean then, that way. So Julie hadn't given me the word direct and I said it in. But I calibrated afterwards that she agreed with the word because she nodded and smiled. We're terrible at paraphrasing. Sorry, changing the wording. Sorry, Charles. want to understand.
Yeah.
And you saw how much Shell agreed with me then, and all I was doing really was repeating a point back at her, and suddenly it feels like someone really understands you because they've just repeated the words at you. Anything else?
Amazing how quickly followed through the layers.
Right.
Quite deep.
I agree. This can be a really, really powerful technique on its own. And if I'm really honest, the reason why we do it, I mean, it's obvious why we do it with a positive thing on module 1, is because we could deal with negative emotions, and we'll certainly get there as the course goes. But it can go somewhere deep very, very quickly, and actually in a place that I wouldn't want people to be on their first weekend kind of arriving, you know, as we're still settling in. But it's amazing how quickly this can get to really, really useful information. Often it doesn't. Sometimes it just goes in a circle and it's a bit weird and a bit intense. But very often it just triggers something and someone has a discovery. And that's just from asking people very clean questions about what's going on for themselves. That's interesting. What do you think's going on there?
I suppose it's by identifying the things about that particular thing that make you feel the happiest. You're almost diametrically opposed to the opposite end of the scale. So you can't help but think about it.
Tidy, not tidy. Tidy. There's only limited places that are our happiest. So then almost some part of our unconscious goes to every place that we're unhappy. So it's interesting that even when we're doing this with a happy thing, still connecting with that same system. Mind and body is one system of ecology. And so even when we're thinking about happy things, it's still firing off everything else as well. So with that, during this weekend, if you find emotions kind of rising or going away or things like that, that's probably what's going on. Some of the stories or the ideas, even if they're not particularly deep or strong for you, might be firing off other things going on in your life, and that's completely normal. And it's something you can relax about, because it might not be until later that you just look back to the first module and you realise how things were getting easier and we're getting more comfortable. Anything else at all? Lynn?
When you're asking questions, we don't as human beings at the moment naturally ask those questions of each other. So by then asking Alicia the questions, you see her internal dialogue really trying to grapple with, well, what is that? What is it about? And bring it down. And her eyes were so down here all the time, like, oh my God, but how does that, and it is completely into context.
Totally.
For her.
And with that context, isn't it madness that we don't talk to each other like that as human beings? I mean, it's not madness, I know that's social etiquette. But isn't it strange that we don't really ever ask each other what's really going on? We kind of float around on the surface all the time and people are full of emotions and we just never really ask these very powerful questions. That was interesting that you were picking up on Anisha's eye accessing cues. Did anyone else notice anything else about eyes while they were having this process? Brilliant. And my point really here is, and it doesn't matter if you didn't notice anything at all, but it's just to say that this morning I introduced you to a concept that for most of you would have been completely new. You never really thought before about how people's eyes go. And then within just a couple of hours, you're already noticing a difference, even if you don't know what to do with that information. It just shows how quickly you're learning that can kind of build. Yes?
I think I haven't thought about the human language before, but you were talking about nodding and but I had to try and control my facial expressions so that I wasn't raising my eyebrows. I was just saying to shopping, but like she says she loves skiing, and I was thinking, oh gosh, that sounds awful.
Agreed. And this is a beautiful demonstration of the silliness of it all. So I'm really glad that you did that. And it is really good to give ourselves the discipline of staying neutral and relax about it, because we don't have to be 100% neutral all the time. And if I'm really honest, I am going to be honest. I find myself with clients even now kind of 10, 11 years in, and doing what's called a content imposition. And that's a new phrase for you, a content imposition. It's a big phrase, but it's for a very easy thing, which is imposing my story onto the other person. It's doing these things saying, okay, or, oh, that's bad. And I catch myself doing it as soon as I do it. And really, I've just unconsciously trained myself to catch myself. So if I do it, then I know not to keep doing it, and also hold whatever they say next with that information in mind. So if I've said, oh God, that's awful, and they go, yeah, no, it is really awful, I know that I've given them that word, it wasn't necessarily their word, so it's just catching yourself doing it. I think to stop doing it completely is almost impossible, and we wouldn't be human beings. Really good to strive to, though, and to try and have the cleanest practice that we can.
Yesterday we were talking about the report and going into the prison, guys kicking off,
Right.
and in order to get rapport, you said to him, "You're right, that's outrageous." So you were sort of, is that a different thing, or?
No, so that is clean language. So he's saying, I'm outraged about this thing, and I'm going, that's right, that's outrageous. So I'm matching him in rapport and then kind of bringing him down to calm him down. Is that your question? I'm calibrating it's not.
Yeah. No, I'll come back to it.
Well, let me give another example of wouldn't be clean language. If he came in and he was screaming and shouting and hadn't said he was annoyed about anything, and I go, what are you so annoyed about? It's common sense, but it's not clean because he hasn't told me he's annoyed about anything. I'm just reading, and I'm doing what's called a mind read. So I'm looking at him and imagining how he feels. Most situations, a mind read is pretty reasonable, especially in real life situations. The man who blocked me on the tube and then pushed me, I mind read that he was pissed off with me, but it was a pretty good mind read. He just pushed me. And if we're working with people in a coaching context and it's something that's very vulnerable to them and something that's a lot more sensitive and personal, we want to be that bit more careful. And all this is about is being that bit more careful.
So when you go round and round, how do you know when to stop? Or could there be going round and round and round and then suddenly there's something quite.
You've probably asked the question of the course there.
Oh, okay.
The only reason we ever ask a question of any client is to provoke an emotional response. Only reason we ever ask a question. And that could be because we're using the torch, and the torch is very interesting information. And actually, the outcome of that torch is to find something that's going to create an emotional response. It might be a happy emotional response. That's my territory, my map. It might be a negative emotional response. That's my territory, my map. But for them, something that they would deem as happy or sad. And then what we do with that emotional response is what the rest of the course is about. It's about the interventions, it's about the work. But actually, if we're just chatting to someone and they're having no emotional response whatsoever, then we're not really coaching, we're just having a chat. Actually, in every moment, our intention is always to try and get an emotional response from this interaction. Which again, how do we spot an emotional response? What skill do we use? Go again? Observation, or sensory acuity. So we're watching all the time, we're calibrating an emotional response from what's going on. That's a very simple answer to a very complicated question. There's much bigger things than that, and what is an emotional response, and how do we get that, and what do we do with that? But we'll skim the surface of that for now. Anything else?
Yeah,
This stuff's great.
I think we kind of, the questions brought up completely different things, for both of us. There was what brought out in our conversation, so, she got to a couple of questions and Sad was like, well, the other actually complicated it and made it go off track, so
Right.
it was just easier because we did that and then realised that it was like, then you realise there was no point in them because you've got everything you need.
It just came to an actual end.
Yeah, it did, yeah. And my girls was like, yeah, I've realised that doesn't actually fit in what you told me years ago. And I accidentally just skipped one. And then said, that's good, did you mean to skip that? And half of it was
Take credit within half a map.
yeah, because the top one wouldn't actually have loved what she told me.
Right.
This thing was, it wouldn't make sense. But no, it's good. So,
And there's also in the sense, I was talking to Diane about this earlier, that something I really enjoy now as a trainer is, when I first started as a trainer in the early days, timing is probably one of the most stressful things to do. I imagine as a teacher as well, or lots of job roles, about checking the time and checking that we're kind of on the right track. And then gradually as the years have gone, I don't think about time at all really, because something in my brain goes, time for a break, which it is in 15 minutes. Or it's time to do something new, because you kind of sense it from the group. And really got that from therapy and from coaching. And often you will finish a session and it'll be directly within a minute or 2 minutes of where the session should end. And it's just because you develop this internal clock through experience and through the unconscious of knowing when and where things should end. And this is that in the microcosm. You just get a sense and instinct when you're talking to someone of, maybe I should push this one a bit deeper, or maybe actually now it's time to back off because this is going to go to a less helpful place. And to be honest, it's an instinct that can't even really be trained. It's just really, that's an experience and hours on the road of driving through an experience.
Can you tell me right now a neutral place when you're in that questioning? Because I'm assuming that smiling is the same as nodding, that you're.
Sure. So this is pretty neutral, right? It's open and it's honest. I'm not smiling with frown. No. You don't need to have this exact face. Everyone else will have a different neutral face.
I'm just very smiley and
Sure. I would again, the smiling is less of an issue than the oh my god, that's awful. I think if you're smiling, it's you're likely to be smiling because they're smiling about something that's encouraging. It's something to work on if they're talking about something horrendous and you're smiling away from it. Then that's a rapport issue, and I would really relax though about smiling.
And they want you to come in and find yourself.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. I really struggle on dates because I turn into an interviewer like this. And I'm really careful not to coach people. I've got out of that phase. You'll go through a phase if you go into this stuff kind of deeply where you almost become a therapist, and that's a huge no-no for people around you where they say something, especially if they're a bit stuck and you just think, I could ask them about 2 of these questions and they're really going to discover something right now. Well, one, they've not given you their permission to do that. They're on a date with you. You're not invoicing for it. And 2, it's not the appropriate environment for you. But I'm just giving you a very honest answer that, yeah, it is a struggle sometimes. And I think the way I deal with that is just by unconsciously, if I catch myself doing it, and consciously I go, no, stop interviewing. Like, back off. And I'm also just not very used to talking about myself because I spend lots of days in rooms with people asking questions about themselves. So when someone turns a question to me, I've had to work at going, it's okay for other people to ask questions too, and I'll be honest and authentic in this moment and give an answer. It is a balance though, to find when you go really deep into this work. I'm going to show you a technique in a moment, about 30 moments, that when used badly will be really dangerous for your relationship. So you won't use it badly because I'm going to train you in it well. But you'll see easily that if you did this too much, you're going to drive people crazy. I saw a hand. No, I didn't. Cool. So we've got 12 minutes to do something completely random, which I won't explain until after you've done it, and I'll explain after the break. But again, we'd be in 2 groups of 5 and 1 group of 4, and preferably different groups in this session. Great. And then in your group, only as much as the people in the group feel comfortable, I want you to empty some of the contents of your handbags or your pockets just on the floor. So make a mess using the stuff you've got in your handbags, but obviously only stuff you're comfortable with and stuff that is invaluable. And the more messy, the better. Go a bit of a mess. Yes, everybody's comfortable with it. It's a combination. Okay, so here's the instruction in your group. You have 10 minutes, so up until the break, in silence, so without chatting, in silence, to sort the mess. So 10 minutes in a group, without talking, to sort the mess. Without talking. Brilliant. So if I can encourage everyone who is in this group to come over here and just have a look at this group's mess, obviously being careful of the stuff on the floor in case they can guide. And just to have a look at how they've sorted this mess. So I can see a very specific phone thing going on, pens thing, general stationery, the keys thing going on. There's a, I don't know how to describe this, perfume, drugs, did someone say? Products for hygiene over there, wallets, and then there's this mess, miscellaneous mess rubbish. And then is this sunglasses cases?
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So this all makes some logical sense. And then we've got a scarf that has its own category.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Let's go and take a look at the mess over here. Just watching and not stepping over Brilliant. So this is a different kind of category. Who was in this group who wants to talk us through? Well, then, can you talk us through the category?
Okay. This is your personal stuff, your your writing material, your information that you picked up together, your mobile phones and artifacts that go with your mobile phones, your water, food, etc. Your purses at the end, your sunglasses, and then your pens, your writing artifacts together.
Okay, brilliant. So there's some similarities, and then there's also some very strong differences within the first group. And then we'll see the final group. And who is wow. And who in this group wants to explain this sorted mess?
When everyone else just put that wherever they put it, and that's how it went.
Okay, great.
There's no particular setting it out. We kind of just held one thing up at a time, and where they put it, everybody put that same item there.
Brilliant. But can we all see logic
Yeah.
in everything that's
I
there?
don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, is that tissue? I wasn't sure what was stuck on top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tissues and toiletry.
Yeah.
So you had a more kind of magic bag thinking to this, which was wherever anyone wants to put anything, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then if we were stuck, I was going to went like that, and they go, oh well,
Let's
yeah,
go with that.
So,
Tidy up.
yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
I don't, genuinely. So as we're looking at all these sorted masses now, what is this demonstrating? What's the point before we go to we can categorise things.
We like things to put things together that belong to feel.
Brilliant. So we feel belong together. Because if I combine these three groups now, there'll be some conflict, right? Some people would go, well, no, that's very much an electronic section, or no, that's very much for personal items. And so the way that we sort things would be different, because we all have different maps and we all have different territories. And we all like to sort things in different ways. Did anyone have the experience where it was very clear where something should go for them and someone else went, or they tried to move it to another place? Or was it always really obvious where stuff should go? And how did you negotiate that?
Just left it.
Tissues should go with all the personal, but toiletries, but
Sure.
nobody else seems to do
Fair enough. So you gave it to group democracy in that case. What's this got to do with anything that's just been speaking about? Nice. I like it. Metaphoric representation of tagging things up. Anything else at all? Brilliant. So we all sort the world differently and we all function differently with how things go. What we're going to be doing after the break is looking at how people might sort things in the room and how we can work with that in different ways. So it's 3 o'clock, well, it's 5 to 3. I'm going to keep timing tight, so I'll see you at 25 past. Thank you.